He booked her out of her own honeymoon. Not a business trip. Not a work emergency. Their honeymoon, 11 nights in Bora Bora, the trip Imani Caldwell had spent 4 months arranging down to the last sunset charter, and her husband replaced her ticket with another woman's name 3 days after the wedding. Didn't warn her, didn't ask. Just logged into the account, canceled her seat, and added Hayrin like it was a minor calendar adjustment. When Imani confronted him, Seong-jae didn't apologize. He explained, "She needs me right now. You're my wife. Why are you still competing with her? If you were standing in that kitchen at 2 in the morning, holding your phone with your honeymoon confirmation replaced by someone else's name, what would you do? If this story already has your heart pounding, you're not alone." Subscribe to this channel and follow every part of Imani's story to the end, because what she does next will shock you. Hit the like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, because this betrayal didn't start with a canceled ticket. It started long before Imani ever said "I do." Imani Caldwell had not spent 33 years building a life that impressed people, especially the rest of it apologizing for having one. She was the kind of woman who made things happen quietly, efficiently, without requiring applause. She ran a luxury travel consultancy out of a slim office in Capitol Hill with 2 full-time employees, a roster of high-net-worth clients who trusted her with their most expensive vacations, and a reputation in Seattle's hospitality industry that had taken a decade to construct. She knew which Maldives resort comped villa upgrades for repeat clients. She knew which Paris hotel had a head concierge who could secure reservations at places that didn't take reservations. She knew things, and she turned that knowledge into a business, and the business was genuinely hers, not inherited, not funded by someone's goodwill, not a side project she'd eventually abandon. She had also, at 31, made the mistake of falling hard for Seong-jae. The mistake part wasn't obvious at first. Seong-jae was 40 when they met, Korean-born, Seattle-based for the past 12 years, and the kind of man who filled a room without trying to. He was tall in a way that didn't announce itself immediately. He had the sort of voice that stayed low, even when he was making a point. He laughed rarely, but when he did, it changed his whole face, softened something that otherwise stayed professionally composed. He ran a shipping logistics company, Quan Pacific, with an efficiency that his competitors apparently found unnerving. He owned warehouses near the port. He had a fleet of delivery operations that stretched from Seattle down through Portland and across to Vancouver. What Imani didn't fully understand when they met, what she only began to piece together gradually, was that Quan Pacific was the legitimate face of something considerably darker. Seong-jae commanded influence that no ordinary logistics company could explain. Men deferred to him in ways that went beyond professional respect. Meetings happened late at night that didn't appear on any calendar. Phone calls arrived that he stepped outside to take, and when he came back, his expression had changed into something flat and unreadable. Imani was not naive. She had grown up in a family that talked plainly about power and who held it and what it cost. She understood what she was seeing. She chose to stay anyway, which was a decision she would spend the next 2 years turning over in her mind, wondering whether she had loved him or simply trusted herself too much to believe she was in danger. Probably both. What she had not factored into her calculation was Yoon Hae-rin. Hae-rin arrived in Imani's life as a footnote. Seong-jae mentioned her, the way people mention furniture. She existed. She had always existed. She would always exist. There was nothing to explain. Childhood friend. Grew up in the same neighborhood in Busan. Came to Seattle 8 years ago when Seong-jae's business expanded and she needed a fresh start. She worked in event planning, or she used to, or she was taking a break from it. The details shifted depending on when you asked. Imani met her for the first time at a dinner 6 weeks into the relationship. Hae-rin was smaller than she'd imagined, with a pretty face and an unsettling habit of looking at Seong-jae while he was speaking to someone else. She was warm to Imani in the way that made Imani feel like she was being assessed and permitted simultaneously. "He talked about you," Hae-rin said, and the way she said it past tense. Proprietary sat wrong in Imani's chest for the rest of the evening. She didn't say anything. She told herself she was reading too much into a tone of voice. The relationship deepened. Seong-jae was, in private, genuinely tender inconsistently, imperfectly, but real enough that Imani believed it. He remembered things. He noticed when she was running on too little sleep and brought coffee without being asked. He sat outside her office in the rain one evening because she'd mentioned offhand that she hated calling car services, and he wanted to drive her home himself. He couldn't always say the right thing. He was emotionally clipped in ways that frustrated her. But the gestures were there, and the gestures were real. What was also real, Hae-rin called at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday because she was upset about something at work. Hae-rin showed up unannounced at Seong-jae's apartment while Imani was there. Hae-rin needed a +1 to a gallery opening, and Seong-jae went and told Imani it was a quick errand. The gallery was 3 hours. Imani found out because she drove past it and saw them through the window. Hae-rin's hand on his arm, and the ease between them that looked less like friendship and more like an arrangement nobody had ever formalized. She said something that time. Seong-jae was patient and steady and completely unmovable. Hae-rin was family. She had no one else. She had difficult relationships. She needed support that Imani stable, independent, professionally successful. Imani simply didn't require in the same way. Wasn't that a compliment, actually? Didn't Imani want a man who was loyal to the people he cared about? Imani recognized that logic for what it was. She had heard variations of it before, from other women, in other stories. You are strong, she is fragile. His loyalty to her is proof. He will be loyal to you. Just be patient. She held the line on some things and let other things go, which is what people do when they love someone and can't yet see the full picture. The engagement happened after 18 months. Seong-jae proposed in a way that was so privately personal, no performance, no audience, just the two of them in the apartment. He cooked dinner in himself, that Imani cried in a way she hadn't expected. Felt like a resolution, like he was finally committing to what they had built together. The wedding planning was when the picture started to clarify. Hae-rin was present, constantly. Not in the wedding party, Imani had held that line, but adjacent to everything. She had opinions about the venue that somehow reached Seong-jae, who passed them along as suggestions. She called during their venue walkthrough because she was having a hard day. She attended the tasting on the pretext of helping, which meant she sat at the table and contributed preferences that weren't hers to contribute. The rehearsal dinner was where Imani came closest to saying something she couldn't take back. Hae-rin arrived in a dress that was the color of old ivory. Not white Hae-rin would have said, if anyone pointed it out. Just pale. Just a neutral. Just a coincidence. But every woman in that room knew exactly what that dress was doing, and half of them watched Imani's face to see how she would handle it. Imani smiled. She said nothing. She drank her champagne and stood beside her fiancé and made pleasant conversation and did not let a single person at that event see what was grinding behind her eyes. Later in the car, she told Seong-jae what she saw and how it felt. He said Hae-rin hadn't meant anything by it. She didn't think about things like that. Imani was overcomplicating a dress. 3 days later, she married him anyway. The wedding itself was beautiful in the way that beautiful things sometimes are slightly surreal, slightly exhausting, sustained by a specific kind of will. The flowers were exactly right. The food was exactly right. Imani had handled most of the vendor relationships herself because, of course, she had. And then, 40 minutes into the reception, Seong-jae disappeared. One of his friends told her he'd stepped outside. Then another 20 minutes passed. Then Imani found him in the courtyard, standing close to Hae-rin, his phone in his hand, his expression concentrated and attentive in a way that Imani had watched him deny to her for 2 years straight. Hae-rin was crying. Seong-jae noticed Imani in the doorway and straightened immediately. She's having a panic attack, he said. She needed some air. Imani looked at Hae-rin, whose eyes were wet but whose face, she couldn't help noticing, arranged itself the moment Imani appeared, something tightening, something almost like satisfactions sliding behind the grief. Your reception is happening, Imani said quietly. I know, I'll be right in. She went back inside. She talked to guests. She danced one's dance with her new husband when he reappeared 30 minutes later, and she smiled, and nobody watching would have known anything was wrong. That night in the hotel suite, she said nothing. She was too tired to start a fight. She didn't have the energy to finish. And part of her, the part that had let too many things go, already told herself it was one night. It was done. Tomorrow they would begin. 3 days later, she was packing for Bora Bora. The notification came from the airline app. A simple system email, the kind that gets buried in inboxes if you're not watching. Flight booking modified. Passenger update. Imani stopped moving. Opened the app. Pulled up the reservation. Read the names on the manifest. Seong-jae, Yoon Hae-rin. She read it again. Then she opened the travel account she managed for both of them, the one she'd built from her professional network, linked to her agency partnerships, used to book the villa, the transfers, the private yacht, the photography, the sunset dinner, the couple's spa, the return flights. The account she had spent 4 months constructing this honeymoon inside. Her ticket was gone, replaced. Hae-rin's name sat where Imani's had been. She stood in the middle of the bedroom for a long moment, suitcase half full on the bed, and felt something in her chest perform a slow, controlled collapse, not the dramatic kind, not the kind that comes with screaming or tears, but the quiet kind that happens when something you already suspected gets confirmed so cleanly that there's no room left for doubt. She put the phone down on the dresser. Then she picked it back up and walked down the hall. Seong-jae was in the kitchen, jacket on, preparing to leave for an early meeting. He turned when he heard her. Imani held up the phone. He saw the screen. His expression shifted not into guilt, not immediately. First into that controlled neutrality he used when he was deciding how to frame something. Hae-rin is having a very hard time, he said. His voice was measured. Steady. The voice he used when he expected his explanation to settle the matter. Her last relationship ended badly. She's in a dark place. This is our honeymoon. Imani's voice came out even. Quieter than she expected. She's only coming for 2 nights. Just to stabilize. Then you fly out and join me for the rest. You canceled my ticket. Each word landed separately. On our honeymoon. 3 days into our marriage. I would have told you. When? Before or after she was already there. Imani set the phone down on the kitchen counter. You moved her in. To our honeymoon. And you were going to manage my reaction after the fact. That's not Seong-jae. She said his name the way she said things she meant. You are my husband. This is supposed to be the beginning of our marriage. And you chose her. He held her gaze, steady, certain. You're my wife now, he said. Why are you still competing with her? Something inside Imani went very still. Not because the words hurt, though they did, with a specific precision that she would feel for months. But because in that moment she understood, fully and without remaining ambiguity, that this was not an incident. This was a position. He had weighed both of them in his mind, made his decision, and articulated it without hesitation or shame. She had been competing. He had decided the competition was beneath her dignity to name. She walked back to the bedroom, picked up her phone, and called Malcolm Vane. Malcolm Vane picked up on the second ring. That was the first thing Imani noticed, not the hour, not the fact that it was barely past 7 in the morning, not even the sound of her own voice when she said his name. Just that he picked up fast, like men who handled crises for a living always did, like they kept one part of themselves permanently awake and waiting. Malcolm. She sat down on the edge of the bed. The suitcase was still open beside her. I need to talk to you. Talk, he said. She laid it out in 4 sentences. The notification, the names, the kitchen, what Seong-jae had said. Malcolm was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Do you want leverage? He said, or do you want out? Imani looked at the suitcase. At the folded linen dress on top, the one she'd bought specifically for the private dinner, on night 6, the one with the tiny embroidered detail at the hem that had taken her 20 minutes to decide on. She had been so careful about every single piece of this trip. She had been careful about all of it. I want out, she said. She heard him exhale slowly, not in surprise, more like a man confirming a measurement he'd already taken. Okay, he said. Don't touch anything yet. I'll have paperwork drawn up today. Can you be in my office by noon? Yes, and Imani, he paused. Don't fight with him before you see me. Don't give him anything to use. She said she understood. Then she hung up and sat in the quiet of the bedroom. For a long moment, listening to Seong-jae move through the apartment, his footsteps unhurried, his routine uninterrupted, the sound of a man who had made his decision and expected the world to rearrange itself around it accordingly. She started unpacking the suitcase, not frantically, not with shaking hands. She took each item out carefully and put it back where it belonged, the dresses back on their hangers, the shoes back in their boxes, the toiletry bag back under the bathroom sink. She moved through it like a task she was completing, not a life she was dismantling. And when the suitcase was empty, she folded it flat and slid it back onto the shelf and went to make herself coffee. She drank it, standing at the kitchen window, while Seong-jae sat at the dining table reading something on his phone, and neither of them said a word. He left at 7:42. He kissed her cheek on the way out. She let him. The moment the door closed, Imani set her coffee down, opened her laptop, and went to work. The honeymoon had been built almost entirely through her professional infrastructure. That was the detail Seong-jae had not thought through or had thought through and dismissed, because in his world, money solved logistical problems, and he had plenty of money. What he hadn't accounted for was that the connections were hers. The relationships were hers. The preferred client status at the resort, the private boat transfer arranged through a contact she'd cultivated for 6 years, the sunset yacht chartered through an operator who returned her calls inside an hour, all of it ran through Imani Caldwell's professional network. She started with the Ocean Villa, one call. Her contact at the property in Bora. Bora had her file open inside 2 minutes. Cancellation processed. No penalty given the circumstances in the relationship. She thanked him and moved to the next line item. Private transfer from the airport to the marina canceled. Sunset yacht canceled. Her contact there added a personal note of sympathy that Imani neither needed nor acknowledged. She appreciated it anyway. Couples massage package canceled. Private dinner on the overwater deck canceled. Photography package canceled. Return flights for 2 canceled. She left Seong-jae and Hae-rin's outbound tickets exactly where they were. Both of them, undisturbed, departing the next morning. They wanted to go, they could go. She wasn't going to stop them. She was simply going to ensure that when they arrived, the paradise waiting for them was entirely of their own making. It took her 47 minutes to dismantle 4 months of work. She made an appointment with her bank for 10 o'clock. She sent 3 emails. She forwarded 2 documents to Malcolm's office. Then she closed the laptop, finished her coffee, and went to shower and get dressed because she had a full day ahead of her and she intended to move through it cleanly. Malcolm's office was on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Seattle with views of Elliott Bay that on a clear morning were genuinely striking. Imani had been there once before 2 years ago when she'd needed a contract reviewed for a corporate client partnership. She remembered thinking then that it was the kind of office that made people feel like their problems were manageable. She wasn't sure she felt that now, but she sat across from Malcolm and let him walk her through the framework, and she answered his questions precisely and without breaking down, and by the time she left, she had a direction. That night she sat at the dining room table with the divorce papers in a folder to her right and her coffee going cold to her left, and she waited. Seong-jae came home at 11:48. She heard him before she saw him key in the lock, the particular weight of his footsteps, the way he moved when he thought the apartment was dark and empty. He came around the corner and stopped. She was sitting there with the overhead light on, fully dressed, hands folded on the table. He looked at the folder. The folder looked back at him. "Imani, sit down," she said. He didn't sit immediately. He stood in the entrance to the dining room with his jacket still on and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, not quite shock, but something adjacent to it. Something that looked like a man realizing the ground had moved while he wasn't paying attention. Then he sat. She slid the folder across the table. He didn't open it immediately. He looked at it like he was deciding whether acknowledging it would make it more real. This is because of the honeymoon, he said finally. You already know it isn't only that. I told you Hayrin is in a difficult. Seong-jae. Imani kept her voice level. Open the folder. He opened it, he read. His jaw tightened on the second page. He set the papers down with a careful, controlled movement, the kind of careful that meant he was genuinely angry and had decided not to show it. You called a lawyer this morning, he said. Yes. Before you spoke to me. You spoke to me in the kitchen. You told me your wife should stop competing with your best friend. There wasn't much left to discuss. He leaned back in the chair. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped into something quieter and more dangerous, the register she'd heard him use on phone calls that made her leave the room. The honeymoon is fixable, he said. Every single thing on that list is fixable. You know that. I know. Then what is this actually about? It's about the fact that I've been married to you for 3 days, Imani said, and you looked me in the face and told me to stop competing. Like I'm the problem. Like I'm the one who needs to adjust. He was quiet. I told you, she continued, that I was uncomfortable with Hayrin at the rehearsal dinner. I told you after the reception. I've been telling you for 2 years that the way you prioritize her is a problem in our relationship. And every time, you have explained to me why I was wrong, why I was insecure, why I didn't understand their history. She paused. So this morning, when I thought about spending the next 40 years having the same conversation, I decided not to. Seong-jae looked at her for a long time. His face had the particular stillness of a man accustomed to waiting people out, to letting silence do the work that force would do clumsily. You canceled everything, he said. It wasn't quite a question. The reservations I made through my accounts, yes. Something moved behind his eyes. The villa gone. The transfer, gone, the yacht, gone. He absorbed this. A slow breath in, a slow breath out. Hayrin doesn't know. That's not my problem. He stood up. She watched him walk to the window, stand there with his back to her, one hand braced against the frame. Outside, Seattle stretched away in the dark, lights on the water, the distant pulse of the port he controlled. I'm not signing this, he said. You don't have to sign it tonight. He turned around. I'm not signing it at all. This is Imani. This is a reaction. This is you making a permanent decision in a single morning because you're angry. You have every right to be angry. What I did was wrong, and I should have told you about Hayrin, and I didn't handle it the way I should have. I know that, but you don't blow up a marriage over. Over what? Her voice stayed flat. Over what, exactly? Finish the sentence. He stopped. Over the honeymoon, she offered. Over 2 nights, over something fixable? What were you going to say? He didn't answer. Because what I keep hearing, she said, is that you believe I'm overreacting. That the scale of my response is disproportionate to the offense. And if that's your genuine position, if you truly believe that what happened this morning is a misunderstanding and not a pattern, then we are not talking about the same marriage. He stood there in the half-dark. She could see him weighing it. That was what he did. He weighed things, calculated, looked for the leverage point. I'll cancel the trip, he said finally. You won't. Hayrin can find another Seong-jae. Imani stood up. She gathered the folder. You're going to get on that plane tomorrow morning. Because that's what you decided to do. And I'm going to be here with my lawyer, figuring out what comes next. That's where we are. She walked to the bedroom. She locked the door not dramatically, not with force, just turned the small lock and heard it click into place. And she sat down on the floor with her back against the bed and her knees drawn up, and she stayed there for a while in the dark, breathing. She did not sleep much. She heard him move through the apartment sometime after 2. Heard the spare room door close. At 6:15, she heard his suitcase wheels on the hardwood floor. At 6:22, she heard the front door, then silence. She got up, went to the kitchen, and made coffee. She drank it standing up, the same as yesterday, looking out the same window. But the apartment felt different with him gone, not emptier. Exactly. More like a space that had been under a specific pressure and was now very slowly releasing it. She called her assistant and told her she'd be working from home for the next several days. Then she opened her laptop and started doing what she should have done months ago, going through the shared financial accounts with the same professional attention she gave every client file. It took her 3 hours. The expenses were not hidden. That was the thing that kept snagging in her mind. They weren't buried. They were right there in the account statements, line after line, dated and categorized, because Seong-jae had never imagined she would look at them this closely, or perhaps had simply stopped caring whether she would. Dinners at restaurants she had never been taken to. Hotel charges in Portland and Vancouver. Event tickets, a concert, twice a fundraiser gala. A flight. A handbag from a boutique on Fifth Avenue that cost more than most people's rent and that Imani had never seen. She built a spreadsheet. She dated each entry and noted the amount and wrote a brief description. She worked through it methodically, the way she worked through vendor contracts, without letting herself feel it until the document was complete and she could see the full shape of the thing laid out in columns. Then she felt it. She closed the laptop. She went to the window. She stood there for a long time looking at the water. The money itself was almost secondary. What the money represented was the timeline, how long this had been happening, how far back the pattern ran, how many times she had sat across from him at dinner and asked how his week had been and gotten an edited version of the truth. Every entry in that spreadsheet was a date on which he had decided she didn't need to know. Every entry was a small, deliberate choice. She went back to the laptop and forwarded the spreadsheet to Malcolm. That afternoon, she moved out of the apartment that was technically Seong-jae's. She had kept her own condo when they married, renting it out to a corporate tenant whose lease had recently expired. She called the property management company, explained the situation tersely, and arranged to move back in by end of week. Then she started packing, not the panicked kind, but the kind where you think carefully about what is yours and what isn't, where you fold things before you put them in boxes, where you don't break anything. Her assistant came to help on the second day. They worked mostly in silence, moving efficiently through the apartment, and when they were done, the space looked exactly the same. Nothing damaged, nothing missing that hadn't belonged to Imani, except for a specific absence that filled the rooms like a change in air pressure. She left her wedding ring on the dining room table, exactly centered, beside the stack of legal documents. Then she left. The calls started that night. Seong-jae was in Bora Bora. By then she calculated the time difference without meaning to, the professional habit too ingrained to suppress. He would have landed, would have discovered the villa was gone, would have been standing at the resort desk watching a staff member explain with enormous politeness that there was no reservation under his name. He called 6 times between 9 p.m. and midnight Seattle time. She didn't answer. His texts were terse at first, then less so. The first 3 were in the tone he used for negotiations, controlled, solution-oriented, implying that whatever had happened was an administrative issue they could resolve. The 4th one cracked slightly Imani. This is not the place or time. The 5th one said, please. She had never seen him write that word in 2 years. The 6th was a single line. I know what you did. We need to talk. She put her phone face down on the nightstand and went to sleep in her own bed, in her own condo, in the room she had painted herself 4 years ago, in a color she'd chosen, without consulting anyone. She slept for 8 hours. She woke up to 14 missed calls and a new problem. A message from a number she didn't recognize, sent at 2:47 a.m. that said, "This is Hayrin. I think we should talk. Please." Imani looked at it for a long moment. Then she screenshot it and forwarded it to Malcolm without responding. She was in the shower when her phone lit up again, this time a call from an international number she recognized as Seong-jae's Bora Bora roaming. She let it ring. When the voicemail notification came through, she pressed play. His voice was different. Not the controlled register, not the low dangerous one. Something rawer, more stripped down, with the particular quality of a man who had been awake for too long and was running low on the performance of composure. "I need you to listen," he said. "What happened out here, the reservation? The villa, I understand what you did, and I understand why. And I'm not calling to argue. I'm calling because I need you to know that Hayrin and I there is nothing physical. There has never been anything physical between us. I know you don't believe that right now. I know I have given you every reason not to believe it. But it is the truth, and I need you to hear it from me directly. He paused. Call me back, please. Imani dressed, made coffee, sat down at the small table by the window in her condo, her table, her window, her condo, a life she had built and protected and maintained through everything, and she thought about the voicemail. She thought about the word physical and the precise, careful way he had used it. Nothing physical, as if that were the line, as if the line had always been there, and everything on this side of it was simply the cost of being married to a man with complicated loyalties. She thought about the spreadsheet. She thought about the rehearsal dinner dress. She thought Cecine the teen. She thought about reception and standing in the doorway of the courtyard watching her brand new husband attend to another woman's tears while their guests drank champagne inside. And then, because she was thorough, because she had part that the most important information was usually in the data you hadn't thought to look for, yet she went back to the shared device. She and Seong-jae had a shared tablet they used for household accounts and travel bookings. He had given her access 2 years ago and never thought to revoke it. She opened the messaging app that synced across his devices, the one they used for shared reminders and grocery lists, and the occasional photo, and she scrolled back. Not to last week, not to last month. She went back 4 months, to before the engagement. The messages between Seong-jae and Hae-rin were right there, archived and undeleted, because he had either trusted the obscurity of the folder structure, or, again, simply hadn't imagined she would look this carefully. She read them in order. The early ones were mundane logistics, check-ins, the ordinary rhythm of two people who talked every day. Then, about 10 weeks before the wedding, a shift. Hae-rin had written, "Does this actually change things between us? You and her being married?" Seong-jae had written back, "Nothing changes." A week later, Hae-rin again, "You always say that. But she's going to be your wife. That means something different." Seong-jae, "You're my family. That doesn't have a category." Another week. "Hae-rin, what if I told you I can't keep doing this the way we've been doing it? What if I needed you to actually choose?" 3 days of silence from Seong-jae. Then a small red heart, 1 emojis, just that. Imani set the tablet down on the table very carefully. She sat without moving for a long time. Outside, Seattle was going about its morning traffic on the street below, a delivery truck backing up, someone's dog barking twice and then stopping. The world entirely indifferent to the fact that inside this condo, something was finally, irrevocably complete. She understood now what the honeymoon had actually been. Not an impulsive decision, not a crisis response to Hae-rin's breakup. A fulfillment. He had been asked to choose, and he had chosen quietly, with a single symbol, weeks before he married someone else, and the honeymoon was simply the moment that choice became impossible to conceal. The betrayal hadn't started in Bora Bora. It had been written in red, months before the wedding, in 3 pixels on a screen, by a man who believed his wife would never look closely enough to find it. Picked up her phone and called Malcolm. "I found something," she said. "Tell me," he said. She told him. Malcolm was quiet for a moment. "Then, send me screenshots. Everything. Dates, messages, the financial records, all of it together." "Already building the file," she said. "Imani." His voice shifted slightly, just a degree. "This is no longer a standard dissolution. You understand that?" "I know. He's going to push back hard when he gets home. His kind always does. I know that too. Are you safe where you are?" She looked around her condo, her table, her window, her coffee, everything hers, everything chosen, everything exactly where she'd put it. "Yes," she said. She sent the file 20 minutes later, screenshots arranged in chronological order, financial records cross-referenced by date, every message and every expenditure laid out in a sequence that told its own story without requiring a single word of explanation. Then she made a second cup of coffee and sat back down at the table. Seong-jae was still in Bora Bora, in whatever last-minute hotel he'd managed to book, in a paradise that had arrived without its architecture, trying to manage a woman who had finally pushed hard enough to get what she wanted, and discovering that what she'd won was expensive and warm and lonely. Imani almost felt something about that. Almost. Instead, she opened her client calendar and started reviewing her pending bookings because she had work to do and clients who were depending on her and a business that had never, not once in 10 years, let her down the way the last 3 days had. She was halfway through her second call of the morning when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she now recognized as Hayrin's. "I know you've seen the messages. I think you deserve to know the full story. I'm not your enemy." Imani finished her call, set the phone down, picked it up again. She read the message twice. Then she typed 4 words and hit send, "Talk to my lawyer," and went back to work. Hayrin's second message arrived 40 minutes after the first. "I'm serious. There are things about Seong-jae you don't know. Things I think you need to know before this goes any further. I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm asking you to meet me." Imani read it at her desk, coffee in hand, client calendar open on the screen in front of her. She read it twice the way she read anything that required evaluation rather than reaction, and then she set the phone face down and went back to her calendar. She lasted 6 minutes, not because Hayrin's message scared her, not because she felt anything resembling sympathy for the woman who had spent 2 years testing the boundaries of her relationship like a contractor looking for structural weaknesses, but because the phrase "things you don't know" had lodged itself somewhere in the back of her mind with the specific insistence of something true. And Imani Caldwell had not built a decade-long career on ignoring data she didn't want to look at. Called Malcolm first. "Hayrin wants to meet," she said. "Says there are things about Seong-jae I don't know." "Don't," Malcolm said immediately. "I know she's either operating on his instructions or she's about to do something impulsive that blows back on both of them. Either way, it's not a conversation you want to have without counsel present." "I know, Malcolm. Then why are you telling me?" Imani looked at the phone. "Because I want someone else to tell me not to," he exhaled. "Don't meet with Hayrin." "Thank you," she said, and hung up. She didn't meet with Hayrin. She also didn't stop thinking about the message, which was its own kind of problem, the sensation of a door left slightly open in a room you've already decided to leave. She worked through the afternoon efficiently, returned 3 client calls, approved a resort proposal for a couple celebrating their 30th anniversary in Tuscany, and tried not to notice the irony of that particular booking landing in her inbox on this particular week. Seong-jae's flight landed in Seattle at 9:47 p.m. She knew this not because she was tracking him, but because the airline notification was still linked to the shared travel account she hadn't yet finished untangling, and the app sent her an automated arrival alert with the same cheerful efficiency it had used to inform her, 5 days ago, that her honeymoon ticket no longer existed. She was in bed when the notification came through. She saw it, noted it, and turned her phone over. 23 minutes later, her condo buzzer sounded. She lay still. It sounded again. 3 short presses. Then a long one. She got up, pulled on a robe, and went to the intercom. She didn't press the talk button. She just looked at the small screen Seong-jae standing in the lobby below, still in travel clothes, his suitcase behind him, looking directly up at the camera with an expression that was too composed to be as calm as he was trying to appear. "Press the talk button." "Go home," she said. "Imani." His voice through the intercom was compressed and thin, stripped of its usual register. "I just need an hour. You need to go home. I've been on a plane for 12 hours. I'm not here to fight. I just need to talk to you. 1 hour. That's all I'm asking." She looked at him on the small screen. At the careful stillness of his posture, which she had spent 2 years learning to read. He was not calm. He was holding himself in the shape of calm because he needed something from her and had correctly identified that force would not get it. "You have 30 minutes, she said, in the lobby. She went downstairs in her robe, with her hair undone and her face bare, and she sat in one of the lobby chairs and let him stand because she was not going to offer him the comfort of a room that was hers. He looked worse than she'd expected. Not devastated, Seong-jae did not do devastated publicly, but worn down in a way she hadn't seen before. There were shadows under his eyes. His jaw was holding a tension that had been there long enough to become structural. He sat down across from her without being invited. He rested his forearms on his knees and looked at her with the direct, undeflecting gaze that she had once found arresting and now found exhausting. "The messages," he said. "You saw them?" "Yes." "The heart," he said it without flinching. "I know how it looks." "How does it look?" "Like I made a choice." "Didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment. It was a reflex. She was threatening to leave, to disappear completely. She's done it before. 3 years ago, she was in a very bad place, and I spent 2 weeks not knowing whether she was alive. And when I found her, He stopped. Reorganized. The heart wasn't a declaration. It was me panicking. It was me saying, "Please don't do anything drastic," in the only way I could in that moment, without saying it explicitly. Imani watched him. "And the honeymoon?" she asked me. After I told her about the engagement, she said she needed to know that things weren't going to change completely, that she wasn't going to lose access to me entirely. And he pressed his lips together. I told her 2 nights. "I thought I could manage it. I thought you'd be upset, but you'd understand once you met her properly, once you saw that it was." "You thought I'd understand," Imani said slowly, "that my husband had given my honeymoon ticket to another woman. I thought if you knew her, Seong-jae." She said his name the way she'd been saying it for 3 days. Flat, final, without anger, because she was past anger. "I don't need to know her. I need a husband who doesn't cancel my ticket to our honeymoon because another woman asked him to choose." He leaned forward. "I chose wrong. I know that. I am telling you I know that. You've been telling me things for 2 years. You told me Hae-rin was family. You told me the gallery opening was a quick errand. You told me the rehearsal dinner dress was a coincidence. You told me her panic attack during our reception was genuine." She kept her voice level. "Every time I named something true, you gave me a better explanation. And I accepted the explanation because I loved you, and because I wanted to be the kind of woman who doesn't make her relationship smaller out of insecurity." She paused. "But I wasn't insecure, I was informed." Seong-jae sat back. Something in his expression changed, not broke, but shifted, like tectonic plates moving so slowly you couldn't see it happen, but could feel the ground change under your feet. "What do I have to do?" he said quietly. "Tell me what I have to do." "There's nothing to do. There has to be. Malcolm will be in touch about the timeline," she said. She stood up. "Go home and sleep. You look terrible." She walked to the elevator. He didn't follow her. She heard him, as the doors opened, make a sound that wasn't quite a word, something low and involuntary. The sound of a man who had never had to watch someone walk away from him before and found the experience considerably worse than he'd imagined. She went back to bed. She slept poorly, but she slept. The morning brought Hae-rin. Not a message this time, Hae-rin herself, standing outside the coffee shop, 2 blocks from Imani's condo at 8:15, in a camel coat with her hair pulled back, looking like she'd been waiting long enough to have finished 1 coffee and started a second. Imani almost walked past. Then Hae-rin said her name, and Imani stopped. She turned around slowly. Hae-rin looked different outside the curated contexts Imani had always seen her in dinner parties, the wedding, the rehearsal dinner. Without the social scaffolding, she looked smaller, slightly frayed around the edges. There were dark circles under her eyes, and she was holding her cup with both hands in a way that looked less like preference and more like ballast. "I told you to contact my lawyer," Imani said. "I know. I'm sorry." Hae-rin's English was precise, slightly formal, the English of someone who had learned it as an adult and was permanently aware of using it. I needed to say something to you directly. Without lawyers, without Seong-jae." Imani looked at her for a long moment. She thought about Malcolm's voice on the phone. "Don't meet with Hae-rin." "You have 5 minutes," she said. "Talk," Hae-rin exhaled. She looked down at her coffee cup, then back up. "I asked him to cancel your ticket. I know you know that. I want you to know that I know how wrong it was. I was not in a good place, and he's always been the person I go to when I'm not in a good place, and I asked him for something I had no right to ask for." She paused. "But I want you to know something that he won't tell you, because it makes him look worse, not better." Imani didn't move. "Then tell me." Hae-rin looked at her steadily. "He didn't cancel your ticket because he was afraid I'd hurt myself." He canceled it because I told him that if he got on that plane with you and left me here, I was going to go to the police. The lobby of Imani's awareness went very quiet. The police, she said. About Quan Pacific. Hae-rin's voice was steady. Too steady, the steadiness of someone who had decided to say something and was getting through the saying of it by sheer momentum. I know things about Seong-jae's business that would be very damaging if they were formally reported. I've known them for years. I've never said anything because she paused and something moved across her face that Imani couldn't fully read. Because I love him. Not the way you think, but I do, and I have covered for him and kept his secrets. And I used that as leverage, and I told him to take me on the honeymoon, or I would go to the authorities. Imani stood on the sidewalk outside the coffee shop and looked at Yoon Hae-rin and felt the ground shift under her in a way that had nothing to do with love or marriage or canceled tickets. You blackmailed him, she said. Yes. Into replacing my ticket. Yes. The morning traffic moved around them, indifferent. A bus went past. Someone on a bicycle rang a bell. Imani was aware of all of it and aware of none of it. The architecture of the last 5 days was rearranging itself in her mind with a speed that felt almost physical, the same sensation as watching a building. You thought you understood reveal, a completely different, load-bearing structure. She'd thought Hae-rin asked. She'd thought Seong-jae chose. He had made a choice. But the choice had not been simple sentiment or misplaced loyalty. It had been made under pressure, in the middle of a threat, by a man caught between his criminal operations and his emotional dependencies, and he had picked the option that kept the whole structure from collapsing. He had sacrificed his wife's honeymoon to protect his empire. Not for Hae-rin, for himself. Why are you telling me this? Imani asked. Hae-rin's jaw tightened. Because he told me, yesterday, from Bora Bora, that he's going to fight the divorce. He said he's going to tell the mediator that this is a misunderstanding, that you acted impulsively, that you don't have enough information to make an informed decision. She looked directly at Imani. And I thought you should have enough information to make an informed decision. This is you turning on him. This is me telling the truth. Hae-rin looked down at her coffee. He used both of us. But he used us. Imani was quiet for a moment. And the things you know about Quan Pacific. Are you willing to say them on record? Hae-rin flinched. Just slightly. Because what you've just told me is either usable information or a conversation that never happened, Imani said. You don't get to throw a grenade and walk away. If you're telling me this, tell me what you actually know. Hae-rin looked at her for a long time. The two women stood on the sidewalk while Seattle moved around them. And Imani watched the calculation happen behind Hae-rin's eyes, the same calculation she herself had been running for 5 days. The one where you weigh the cost of saying the true thing against the cost of living inside the false one. There are 3 warehouses, Hae-rin said finally. On the south side of the port, they're registered to Quan Pacific as cold storage. They're not used for cold storage. What are they used for? Moving money. Cash from the nightclubs and the gambling operations run through the logistics network. It gets moved through the warehouses before it goes into the legitimate accounts. She paused. I handled the books for 2 of those warehouses for 8 months, 4 years ago, before I understood fully what I was doing. By the time I did understand, I was already part of it. Imani said nothing. I have copies of the records, Hae-rin said. Kept them. For myself. In case I ever needed, she stopped. In case, Imani repeated. Hae-rin nodded once. Imani looked at her. The frayed edges. The too careful stillness. A sound when the 2 cups of coffee and the both hands grip and the particular expression of someone who had just stepped off a ledge and hadn't yet confirmed whether the ground was going to come up to meet them or not. She felt no warmth toward Hae-rin. She did not mistake this conversation for friendship or alliance, or any of the comfortable categories that would have made it easier to process. But she recognized what was in front of her, a woman who had spent years allowing herself to be kept close, kept useful, kept compliant by a man who was very good at making the people around him feel indispensable, and who had only now, backed into her own corner, begun to understand the shape of the cage she'd been living in. Imani recognized it because she had spent 2 years in a version of the same structure. Different architecture, same foundation. Send the records to Malcolm Vane, she said. His address is on the firm's website. Do it today. Hayrin exhaled. It came out ragged, okay? And Hayrin. Imani looked at her steadily. If you're doing this to hurt him, fine. People do things for bad reasons that still produce good results. But if you're doing this, and then you change your mind because he calls you and asks you to, then you have made my situation significantly more dangerous, and I will not forgive that. I know. Do you? Hayrin met her eyes. Yes, Imani walked away. She was 2 blocks from her condo when the full weight of what she'd just heard landed on her, not the emotion of it, but the geometry. Criminal infrastructure, the warehouse records. Specific documented evidence of financial crimes that Hayrin had been carrying for 4 years like a weapon she was afraid to fire. Imani stopped walking. She stood on the sidewalk and thought very carefully. She was in the middle of divorcing a man who ran a criminal syndicate. She had accessed and documented his private financial records, legitimate ones, but still, she had dismantled a network of professional services he'd been relying on through her accounts. She had moved out of his apartment and transferred assets and sent everything to a lawyer, and she had done all of this without fully accounting for the possibility that Seong-jae, when he ran out of civilized options, would stop behaving like a husband and start behaving like a crime boss. She called Malcolm from the sidewalk. I need to see you today, she said. Something's changed. How changed? Significantly. She kept walking. And Malcolm, I need you to tell me honestly. Does the firm have experience with clients whose spouses have organized crime connections? Pause. We do. Is it the kind of experience that means you know who to call if things get complicated? Imani. His voice was measured and deliberate. Come to the office. Now she was there in 20 minutes. She told him everything: the sidewalk conversation, Hayrin's admission, the warehouse records, the blackmail. A sound like green wood splitting. She laid it out in the same methodical sequence she'd used for the financial spreadsheet, and she watched Malcolm's expression shift as she talked from professional attentiveness into something more concentrated. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. She's going to send the records, Imani said. I told her to send them here. If she does, Malcolm said slowly, then we have a decision to make about what we do with them. Because that information changes the nature of this divorce entirely. I know. It also changes your personal risk profile. I know that too. Seong-jae is not going to sit quietly through a divorce proceeding if he knows you have documentation of his financial crimes. The settlement he might have accepted last week is not the settlement he'll accept now. I know. Malcolm looked at her. Are you prepared for what it means to have this information? Imani thought about the condo, her table, her window, the life she had built without anyone's permission or assistance. She thought about the spreadsheet she'd built in 3 hours. She thought about the airline notification and the name on the manifest, and the moment in the kitchen when Seong-jae had looked at her and explained, with patient certainty, that being his wife meant she'd already won and didn't need to compete anymore. I've been prepared for difficult things my entire life, she said. The difference is that this time I'm not pretending the difficult thing isn't happening. Malcolm nodded. He reached for his legal pad. All right, he said. Then let's talk about how we handle this. They were 40 minutes into the conversation when Malcolm's assistant knocked and opened the door 4 inches. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said. There's a man in the lobby asking for Ms. Caldwell. She paused. He says he's from Quan Pacific. He says it's not an official visit. The room went still. Imani looked at Malcolm. Malcolm looked at her. He didn't give a name? Malcolm said. He gave a name, the assistant said. He said to tell her it's Park Dae-sung. He said she'd know who that was. Imani did not know who that was. But from the way Malcolm set his pen down very carefully on the legal pad, she understood that Malcolm did. Dae-sung, Malcolm said quietly, not quite to her. He's Seong-jae's operations manager. He's been with Quan Pacific for 11 years. Imani felt something cold move through her chest. Not fear or not only fear. More like the sensation of a situation clarifying into its actual shape, all the comfortable ambiguity burning off at once. Seong-jae had gotten home. He had slept or hadn't slept. He had made a phone call, and instead of calling a divorce lawyer, he had sent Dae-sung. "Don't see him," Malcolm said immediately. "I'll go down." "No," Imani stood up. "I'll go." "Imani, he's not here to hurt me," she said. "Not in a law firm lobby with cameras and a front desk. He's here to deliver a message." She straightened her jacket. "I want to hear the message." Malcolm stood too. "Then I'm coming with you." They went down together. Park Dae-sung was standing near the reception desk, a compact man in his late 40s, plainly dressed, with the particular stillness of someone who spent most of their time watching rather than being watched. He looked at Imani when she walked in. He didn't look at Malcolm. "Ms. Caldwell," he said. "Mr. Park," she said. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced an envelope. Plain white, sealed, her name on the front in Seong-jae's handwriting. He held it out. She took it. "He wants you to read it before the next meeting with your attorney," Dae-sung said. His English was careful, accented, precise. "He wants you to understand his position before either of you makes a move that cannot be reversed." "Tell him I'll read it," she said. Dae-sung nodded once. He looked at her for a moment, not threateningly, not coldly, but with the expression of a man who had been in difficult rooms for a long time and knew how they ended. "He also asked me to tell you," Dae-sung said, "that he knows about the conversation this morning. He knows what she told you." A pause. "And he wants you to know that whatever Hee-rin said, she is not a reliable source. She has reasons of her own for the things she tells people." Then he turned and walked out of the lobby. Imani stood with the envelope in her hand and felt the last wall of the situation fall away. Seong-jae knew. He knew Hee-rin had talked to her. Which meant either he was having Hee-rin watched, or Hee-rin had told him herself, called him after the sidewalk, gave him a version of the morning that served her own needs. And whatever fragile alliance Imani had imagined existed between herself and Hee-rin had already collapsed before it had a chance to mean anything. She looked at the envelope. "Don't open it here," Malcolm said quietly. She didn't. She put it in her bag and walked back to the elevator, and her face was composed, and her steps were steady, and she did not let Malcolm or the receptionist or the security camera in the corner see what was running through her body in place of blood. Because Imani Caldwell understood, in that lobby, with that envelope in her bag and Dae-sung's words still in the air, that she had stepped into territory she had not fully mapped when she made her first call to Malcolm 6 days ago. She had filed for divorce from her husband. Her husband had sent her a message through his operations manager. And somewhere across the city, Yoon Hee-rin, the woman who had blackmailed her way onto a honeymoon, who had spent 4 years keeping warehouse records as insurance, who had stood on the sidewalk 40 minutes ago and looked Imani in the eye and said, "I kept them." In case was either on the phone with Seong-jae right now, or she was not. And the difference between those two possibilities was the difference between having an unlikely ally and standing completely alone. The elevator doors opened. Imani stepped in. She pressed the button for the 14th floor, and as the doors closed, she reached into her bag and felt the sealed envelope between her fingers, its weight, its specific solidity, and understood that whatever Seong-jae had written inside it, the letter was not really a letter. It was a line, and she was being asked, very clearly, whether she understood that she was about to cross it. She opened the letter in the elevator. She knew she shouldn't. Malcolm had told her not to, and Malcolm was right about most procedural things, even when he was catastrophically wrong about others, and she knew the elevator was not the place, and the immediately post-Dae-sung moment was not the time. She opened it anyway, because she was done waiting for the correct moment to know things. The correct moment had not served her well. The letter was 1 page. Seong-jae's handwriting, the same compressed, careful script. She read it as the elevator moved and read it again when it stopped and the doors opened on the 14th floor, and she stood there blocking them while a paralegal waited politely to get on. She stepped out. The paralegal stepped in. The doors closed. She stood in the corridor outside Malcolm's floor and read the letter a 3rd time. It was not what she expected. There were no threats, no legal language, no propositions dressed as courtesy. It was 4 paragraphs, and what it said, stripped of the careful phrasing, was this. He knew she had spoken to Hae-rin. He knew what Hae-rin had told her. He was not going to pretend that the warehouse information was fabricated, because Imani was too precise a person to be managed with a lie she could verify. What he was going to tell her instead was the thing Hae-rin had omitted, which was that Hae-rin herself had not been an innocent bookkeeper who stumbled into the operation. Hae-rin had asked to be involved. In 2019, when Seong-jae was restructuring the financials routing, Hae-rin had come to him and said she wanted to be useful, wanted to be part of something that mattered to him, wanted the word he used was indispensable. She had wanted to make herself indispensable, and he had let her, because he understood the currency she was offering, and he had accepted it without examining the cost. The fourth paragraph was 3 sentences. I am not writing this to protect myself. I am writing it because you are about to make decisions based on a version of events that is incomplete. You deserve the complete version, you always did. Imani folded the letter. She put it in her bag. She walked into Malcolm's suite, sat down across from him, and said, "We need to talk about what you did." Malcolm sat very still. His hands were on the desk in front of him, fingers interlaced, and he had the particular posture of a man who has decided that stillness is the safest form of presence right now. "The regulatory contact," she said. "Walk me through it again." Every step. He did more slowly this time, more precisely. 3 weeks ago, after their conversation about the warehouse records, he had called a contact at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, not formally, he said again. Preliminary conversation about whether the pattern Imani had described was consistent with anything currently under active review. His paralegal had handled the follow-up email using her work account rather than the clean channel he'd specified. Was it under active review? Imani said. Malcolm paused. Malcolm, there is an open inquiry, he said carefully. I was told informally that Quan Pacific has been on a watch list for 14 months. They haven't moved on it. They haven't moved on it yet because they haven't had enough internal documentation to build a case that survives scrutiny. Imani looked at him, and the warehouse records Hae-rin described would be exactly the kind of internal documentation that builds that case. Yes, which is why you made the call before telling me. Because you were trying to determine whether Hae-rin's records were the missing piece. Yes, she sat back, and now Seong-jae knows you made the call. Which means he knows there's an active inquiry. Which means in the last 24 hours, he has been making decisions about the organization, about his exposure, about this divorce, with information that he had and I didn't. Malcolm said nothing. How bad is this? She said. It depends on what he does with it. Give me the range. He exhaled. Best case, he accelerates the settlement, signs quickly, and quietly takes steps to restructure the operation's exposure before anything formal moves. He wants the divorce clean and closed, so that if something happens with the inquiry, you're clearly separated and uninvolved. That's the best case. A pause. Worst case, he decides that the inquiry changes his calculus entirely. That a contested divorce proceeding with a wife who has been in contact with a lawyer who pinged a federal office is a liability he cannot manage. And he stops behaving like a husband trying to end a marriage and starts behaving like a man protecting an organization. The room was quiet. Imani felt her heartbeat not racing, just present, just making itself known in that specific way it did when the situation required her to be completely awake. A sound like green wood splitting. She felt it in her throat and in her fingertips, and in the particular tension across her shoulders that had been there for 3 weeks, and that she had been managing with movement and coffee and the disciplined practice of not catastrophizing until catastrophe was confirmed. Call your federal contact back, she said, today. Tell them you have a source who was directly involved in the financial operations for 8 months and maintained personal copies of records. Tell them you're not in a position to deliver that source right now, but you want them to know it exists. Malcolm stared at her. Imani, I can't make representations to a federal. I'm not asking you to represent anything. I'm asking you to give them enough to know the case is buildable. So that Seong-jae's people, when they try to find out what the inquiry has and doesn't have, learn that the answer changed in the last 24 hours. She held his gaze. Right now, he thinks his move sending Daesung, delivering the letter, presenting that email chain put him back in control. I want him to stop thinking that. Malcolm was quiet for a long moment. You're using the threat of Hae-rin's records without having the records. I'm using the truth. The records exist. Hae-rin has them. The fact that she's currently not cooperating is a status, not a permanent condition. She paused. Seong-jae sent that letter because he wanted me to have the complete version. He told me Hae-rin asked to be involved. He told me she made herself indispensable on purpose. What he didn't say, but what that information implies, is that Hae-rin has leverage over him that has nothing to do with sentiment. She's been his operational liability for 4 years. And he knows that if she ever decides the arrangement isn't worth the cost, the records become a weapon. She looked at Malcolm steadily. He's afraid of her, not the way he's afraid of losing me. A different kind of afraid. Malcolm picked up his pen, set it down, picked it up again. You want to make him understand that keeping Hae-rin cooperative is now contingent on his behavior in this divorce. I want him to understand that his decision to send Dae-sung to this office accelerated a timeline that wasn't in his interest to accelerate. That's all. And if he calls the bluff, it's not a bluff. The records exist. Hae-rin is unpredictable. He knows that better than anyone. He cannot be certain she'll stay quiet indefinitely, especially if she feels he's abandoned her again. Imani stood. Make the call. Then I need you to prepare the full documentation package. Everything I gave you from the legitimate accounts, the message history, the expense records organized as if we're preparing for formal mediation. I want it ready in 48 hours. Malcolm looked up at her. Something had shifted in his expression, not quite respect, because he'd always had a version of that, but something more specific. The recognition of a person operating at a level he hadn't fully accounted for. I owe you an apology, he said, for the regulatory contact. I should have. Yes, she said, you should have. We'll talk about it after this is over. She picked up her bag. 48 hours. She was at the elevator when her phone rang. Unknown Seattle number. She almost didn't answer, then she did. Miss Caldwell, a woman's voice, older, precise. My name is Misuk. I am Seong-jae's mother. I believe we should meet. Imani closed her eyes briefly. When, she said. The restaurant Misuk had chosen was the kind of Korean establishment that didn't advertise, didn't need to, and had been in the same location for 22 years because the people who knew it kept coming back and kept bringing the people they trusted. Misuk was already seated when Imani arrived, a small, immaculate woman in her early 70s with Seong-jae's posture and a face that had held its structure into age the way certain buildings do, revealing the original architecture more clearly as the surrounding material settled. She stood when Imani approached. She did not bow, she was not performing formality. She simply stood, which was its own form of acknowledgement. They sat. Tea arrived without being ordered. The server left without speaking. Misuk looked at Imani for a moment, with the particular directness of a woman who had long since stopped having the patience for approach. He sent Daesung, she said. I know. Yes, Imani said. He did it before I could stop him. When I found out, I told him it was the stupidest thing he had done in a situation full of stupid things, and he agreed, which is how I know he is genuinely frightened. Misuk poured tea for both of them with a steady hand. My son is not frightened often. When he is, he makes mistakes. I know, Imani said. I want to ask you something. Misuk set the teapot down precisely. And I want the honest answer, not the composed one. Imani waited. Do you still love him? The question landed in the quiet of the restaurant and sat there. Imani looked at the tea. She thought about the correct answer, which was also the true one, which was the most complicated version. Parts of him, she said finally, the parts that were real. Misuk nodded slowly. He has always had the problem of being two men. The man in private, the one who remembers how people take their coffee, who waits in the rain, and the man who runs the organization. He has never successfully integrated them. He keeps them in separate rooms and moves between them and believes no one can see the gap. She paused. You saw it. From the beginning, Imani said. I chose to believe the gap would close. It didn't, no. Misuk was quiet for a moment. She looked at her tea. When he was 26, she said, his father, my husband, was in a situation not unlike what Seong-jae faces now. A business problem that became a personal problem, that became a legal problem. My husband chose the organization over the family. Twice, the second time I left. She looked up. It took me 4 years to leave. I have spent the years since then watching my son become a version of his father and being unable to stop it. Because the lessons men like this need to learn are only available through experiencing the consequences they've spent their whole lives engineering themselves out of. Imani felt the weight of it. Misuk, I can't stay married to him so that he learns a lesson. I know Misuk said it without argument. I'm not asking you to. I am asking you. She paused, choosing to be careful. What you are doing with the lawyers, the contacts, the documentation. Be careful how far you push it, and be certain you understand what you're pushing toward. I'm pushing toward a settlement that protects what's mine. Yes, and Seong-jae knows that. But the men around him, Misuk's voice shifted slightly, something harder coming into the precise English, do not always wait for him to make decisions. Dae-sung acts quickly. He has protected the organization for 11 years by acting quickly. Seong-jae told him to stand down. Dae-sung went to your lawyer's office anyway. She held Imani's gaze. You understand what I'm saying. Imani's hands were flat on the table. She could feel her heartbeat again. How serious is Dae-sung? He is loyal to the organization first, Misuk said. Seong-jae second, in that order. He was loyal to my husband the same way. She paused. When Seong-jae told me he had sent Dae-sung, I asked him directly, has Dae-sung been told to stop? He said yes. I asked him whether Dae-sung would. A long pause. He did not answer. The restaurant continued around them. Soft sounds, other conversations. The ordinary warmth of a room full of people eating lunch. A Sauni set with information and let it settle into the correct position, which was frightening in a way she was going to have to decide how to carry. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because I loved you, Misuk said simply. Past tense by circumstance, not by feeling. And because the woman my son married, the real one, not the one he handled, deserves to walk out of this with her life intact. She picked up her tea. Finish it quickly. Whatever you're doing with the lawyers, accelerate it. Don't give Dae-sung time to decide that the organization's interests and Seong-jae's interests have diverged. Imani drove back to her condo and called Malcolm from the parking garage before she went upstairs. How fast can you have the documentation package ready? She said. I said 48 hours. I need it in 24. Pause. I can do that. What changed? Timeline changed. She was already moving toward the elevator. I need you to reach out to Seong-jae's lead attorney tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Tell him we're prepared to move to formal mediation within 72 hours, and that we'll be bringing a comprehensive documentation package. Don't tell him what's in it. Just make sure he understands the number of pages. You want him scared before he sits down. I want him efficient, she said. Scared people make mistakes. Efficient people make deals. She went upstairs. She made coffee. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop and started working not the divorce, not the legal strategy, but her actual work, her client files. 3 pending proposals that had been sitting in her drafts for 2 weeks, while her personal life conducted its implosion. She worked for 3 hours, efficiently and well, because the discipline of good work had always been where she could access the clearest version of herself. At 9:15, her buzzer sounded. She went to the intercom. The screen showed the lobby. No one was there. She waited. Nothing. She went back to her desk. 12 minutes later, her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. There's an envelope in your mailbox. You should read it tonight. She felt the cold move through her. Slow and deliberate, starting in her chest. She called building security. She asked them to check the lobby and the mailbox area. The security guard, a man named Carlos, who she'd known for 3 years and who had always been straightforward with her, checked and called back in 4 minutes. There is an envelope in your mailbox, Ms. Caldwell, he said. Do you want me to bring it up? Is there anyone on camera who put it there? Pause. The camera in that corridor was offline between 9:10 and 9:18 tonight. Maintenance says it was a routine restart scheduled. Another pause. Ma'am, do you want me to bring it up? A scheduled camera restart that coincided precisely with someone accessing her mailbox. She thought about Mi-suk's voice. Dae-sung acts quickly. He has protected the organization for 11 years by acting quickly. Yes, she said. Bring it up. And Carlos, stay on the floor until I tell you it's fine. The envelope was plain. No return address. Her name in handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it at the kitchen table with her phone in her left hand and Carlos standing in the hallway outside. Inside was a single photograph, printed on plain paper. It showed Imani coming out of the restaurant where she'd met Mi-suk. Today, 3 hours ago, she was on the sidewalk. Mid-step, red bag over her shoulder, the restaurant door closing behind her. The photo had been taken from across the street and slightly above from a car or a second-story window or somewhere that required planning. Under the photograph, in the same handwriting as the envelope, "You are not alone in this. Neither is he. Think carefully about next steps." She sat at the table and breathed. In through the nose, out slow. She was being watched. Had been watched today, which meant possibly for longer. The photograph was not a threat in explicit terms, no language of harm, no ultimatum. It was something more precise, a demonstration of capability. A way of saying we know where you are and we can reach you, without saying anything that could be reported. Dae-sung, she called Malcolm. I need you to listen carefully, she said when he picked up. Don't react, just listen, she described the photograph. Camera, the timeline. Malcolm was silent through all of it, in the particular silence of a man recalibrating rapidly. All right, he said when she finished. His voice had changed. Quieter, more stripped. Are you safe right now? Carlos is in the hallway. Stay there tonight. Don't go out. I wasn't planning to. Imani. He paused. I need to tell you something. The regulatory contact I made, the informal inquiry. I got a call back today. An hour ago. I was going to tell you tomorrow, but he stopped. They want to move faster than I indicated. The inquiry has been stalled for 14 months because they couldn't get internal documentation. When I told them a source existed even without naming Hayrin, even without producing anything, it moved something internally. They're convening a review meeting next week. She closed her eyes. This is no longer a divorce with complicated background, Malcolm said. This is a divorce taking place while a federal inquiry accelerates around it. And if Seong-jae's people know the inquiry moved, they know, she said. That's what the photograph is. That's what tonight is. Someone in or around that federal office passed information to Kwan Pacific, and Dae-sung is telling me he knows. She pressed her fingers to her temple. How fast can you get me into formal mediation? Seong-jae's attorney hasn't responded to my outreach yet. Try him directly, his cell, tonight. If I call an opposing counsel at 10 p.m. Malcolm. She made her voice very quiet and very clear. There is a photograph of me taken today sitting on my kitchen table. Call him, Malcolm called. He called back 17 minutes later. 48 hours, he said. Seong-jae's attorney agreed to mediation in 48 hours. Private office downtown. He didn't ask why the urgency. He already knew. Of course he did, she said. Seong-jae told him. What does that mean? She looked at the photograph on the table. At her own image, mid-step, 3 hours ago, caught from a distance by someone who wanted her to know she'd been caught. It means Seong-jae is also trying to close this quickly, she said. Which means he's also afraid of the timeline. She paused. Which means he may not know what Dae-sung did tonight. The room was very quiet. Malcolm, she said. Can you get into that mediation and argue my case without me if you needed to? A long pause, legally with a power of attorney, yes. Why? Because I may need to do something that takes me away from the office that day, and I need to know the proceedings don't stop if I'm not in the room. What are you planning to do? She looked at the photograph again. At the restaurant door behind her own retreating image. Calculated message of it, the precision, the timing, the plain paper, and unmarked envelope. The entire infrastructure of a man who had been protecting an organization for 11 years by removing problems before they became crises. She thought about what Mi Suk had said. Seong-jae told him to stand down. Dae-sung went to your lawyer's office anyway. And she thought about Hae-rin. Hae-rin, who had bookkeeping records from 2 warehouses. Hae-rin, who had been brought back into Seong-jae's orbit with the promise of restored access. Hae-rin, who was unpredictable and frightened and fundamentally in the same position Imani had been in 18 months ago, holding something valuable to a powerful man and trying to decide whether the holding of it was protection or trap. I'm going to talk to Hae-rin, Imani said. She won't answer. She will if I don't call. She stood up from the table. She lives in Belltown. I know the building. She mentioned it once during the rehearsal dinner when she was giving Seong-jae her new address. I'm going there, Imani. That is, tonight is not. Tonight is exactly the right time, she said, because tomorrow Seong-jae will have had 12 more hours to solidify whatever arrangement brought Hae-rin back, and in 48 hours we're in mediation. And after that, whatever Hae-rin knows or has or could say becomes legally irrelevant to my case. She moved to the door. I'm not going to use her as a weapon. I'm going to give her the same information someone should have given me 14 months ago. Which is what? That the man she's protecting doesn't protect people, Imani said. He keeps them. She told Carlos she was fine. She thanked him. She went downstairs and got into her car and drove to Belltown, because she had stopped waiting for the correct moment to know things and she was not going back to waiting now. The building Hae-rin lived in was a modern mid-rise with a glass lobby and a keypad entry. Amati stood outside for a moment, looking at the intercom panel, finding the unit number she'd reconstructed from a single offhand mention during a dinner she hadn't wanted to attend. She pressed the button. Nothing for 20 seconds. She pressed again. A voice came through, thick with sleep or something else. Who is it? Hae-rin. Imani kept her voice steady. It's Imani Caldwell. I'm not here to fight. I need to show you something. Silence. Hae-rin. Someone photographed me leaving a restaurant tonight. Someone who knew where I'd be. Someone who has been tracking my movements. She paused. Think about whether that same someone knows where you are right now. A much longer silence. Then the door buzzed open. His apartment was on the 6th floor and she answered the door in a gray sweatshirt and bare feet, her hair down, her face without the careful construction it usually wore in public. She looked younger this way and also more frightened, which were possibly the same thing. She looked at Imani for a moment, then stood back from the door. Imani came in. The apartment was small and carefully arranged, the furniture chosen with the specific intentionality of someone who moves often and has learned to make spaces feel temporary in a way that looks deliberate. Couch, a low table, several boxes still half unpacked against one wall, which meant Hae-rin had moved here recently. Recently enough that she hadn't finished settling in. Imani sat on the couch without being invited because the night was past formality. She took out her phone and showed Hae-rin the photograph. Hae-rin looked at it. She went very still. Who sent this? She said. Someone from the organization. I think Dae-sung. Or someone working for him. Imani watched her face. You know who Dae-sung is? Yes. When Seong-jae asked you to stay quiet, when you went back to him, did he tell Dae-sung that you'd talk to me? Hae-rin sat down on the far end of the couch. She pulled her knees up. She looked at the photograph again, and Imani watched the calculation happening behind her eyes. Not the calculation of a woman deciding whether to lie, but the calculation of a woman deciding whether she has the energy left to maintain the lie she's already been living. He told him some of it, Hae-rin said finally. He said I'd had a moment of, he called it a moment of instability. That I'd said some things that weren't accurate and that I'd understood that and come back. She looked at the floor. I don't know what Dae-sung believes. What did Seong-jae promise you? Imani said. When you went back. Hae-rin was quiet. Hae-rin. He said things would go back to how they were. Her voice was flat. Before you. Before everything. He said once the divorce was finished and everything was quiet, we could. She stopped. Pressed her lips together. He said we could figure out what we actually were to each other. Without the pressure. Imani looked at her for a moment. At the half-unpacked boxes, at the bare feet and the sweatshirt and the careful small apartment. At the woman who had spent 15 years making herself indispensable to a man who filed her under family and meant useful. He won't do it, Imani said, not unkindly, just factually. You know that. Hae-rin didn't answer for a moment. Then, very quietly, I know. And Dae-sung photographed me tonight, which means the organization is tracking anyone who has contact with the divorce. Which means it's tracking you. She let that sit. You have records from 2 warehouses. You've had them for 4 years. Right now those records are leverage. They keep you safe because Seong-jae needs you quiet. But if the divorce closes and the organization decides you're a liability rather than an asset. Stop, Hae-rin's voice was sharp. I know. I've known. I've been living with knowing since 2020, and it doesn't get easier to hear. She looked at Imani directly for the first time since opening the door. What do you want from me? The same thing I told you on the sidewalk, Imani said. Send the records to Malcolm Vane tonight. If I do that, Seong-jae cannot protect you from Dae-sung if the organization decides you're a problem. He couldn't protect me either. I was his wife and Dae-sung still put a photograph in my mailbox. She held Hae-rin's gaze. The records are the only thing that keeps you safe. Not because they protect you from Seong-jae, but because once they're in a lawyer's hands, in a formal legal process, touching you becomes a federal problem. You become untouchable. She paused. Right now you're just quiet. There's a difference. Hae-rin sat with this. Her arms were wrapped around her knees, and she was looking at the middle distance with the expression of someone hearing a thing they already knew, said in a language clear enough to finally act on. If I send them, she said slowly, what happens to him? I don't know, Imani said. That's not up to me anymore. Stopped being up to me when Dae-sung put that photograph in my mailbox. She paused. I'm not asking you to destroy him. I'm asking you to protect yourself. What the records do after that is between the lawyers and the federal office. Hae-rin looked at her. You could have gone to the federal office yourself. Weeks ago. You didn't need me. I don't have the records. You do. Imani kept her voice level. And I'm not going to lie to you. Yes, the records help my case. They demonstrate the financial entanglement and the pattern of behavior that my attorney has been building a picture of for 6 weeks. But that is secondary to the fact that you are sitting in a half-unpacked apartment in Belltown with a photograph of me taken tonight, and the reasonable concern that the same person who took it knows you're building. She looked at Hae-rin steadily. Send the records. Tonight. And then I would suggest you don't sleep here. Hae-rin looked at the photograph one more time. She set the phone down on the table between them. She unfolded from the couch and stood up, and she walked to the half-unpacked boxes against the wall, and she crouched down and moved 3 boxes aside and pulled out a laptop that had been stored flat behind them. She carried it to the table. She opened it. She typed for a moment, navigating to something, and then she turned the screen toward Imani. A folder, dated files, organized by month. 2 years of records from 2 warehouses. The financial architecture of a money laundering operation rendered in spreadsheets and scanned documents with the specific mundane detail of something that was handled by someone who believed accuracy was her protection. I'm going to send these to your lawyer, Hae-rin said. All of them. Tonight, she looked at Imani, and then I'm going to my friend's place in Fremont, and I'm not going to answer my phone for 3 days. That's a good plan, Imani said. She stood. She picked up her phone from the table. She looked at Hae-rin at the fear in her face, and the exhaustion behind the fear, and the specific bleak clarity of a woman who has finally done the thing she's been afraid to do for 4 years and doesn't yet know whether it will feel like freedom or like falling. Hae-rin, she said. Hae-rin looked up. Whatever he told you about why he chose you over me in Bora Bora, whatever version of that story made it make sense, it wasn't love. It was management. He managed you for 15 years the same way he managed me for 2. She said it without cruelty, just plainly. You deserved better than that. I did too. Hae-rin held her gaze for a long moment. Something moved across her face that was too complicated to name. I know, she said. Her voice was very quiet. I've known for a long time. Imani left. She drove back to her condo and went upstairs and sat at her kitchen table with the photograph in front of her. And at 11:47, her phone showed an email notification. A file transfer from Hayrin's email address to Malcolm Vane's, carbon copied to Imani's account, containing 63 attached documents. She stared at the notification. She did not feel triumph. She felt the particular exhausted weight of a situation that had finally moved into its last phase, not resolution yet, not safety, but the specific, irreversible moment when the last piece has been placed, and what follows is no longer uncertain in its direction, only in its details. She forwarded the email to Malcolm with 3 words, "Tonight. Call me." His reply came in 4 minutes. Received. "I'll be in the office at 6. She put the phone down. She looked at the photograph one last time, her own image, mid-step, caught from a distance, on a day that had started with an elevator and a letter, and ended with 63 documents that were now in a lawyer's hands where a photograph in a mailbox could not reach them. She picked up the photograph and placed it face down on the table. She went to bed with her phone on the nightstand, and the building quiet around her, and the city doing what cities do at midnight, moving, breathing, indifferent, and she lay in the dark with her eyes open for a long time, feeling the specific sensation of a situation that had outgrown every structure she'd originally built to contain it, and understanding that tomorrow, in a mediation room with pale carpets and tasteful art, she was going to walk in with 63 documents, and the truth and whatever that produced was going to be the end of this. She did not know yet what the end looked like. She knew she would be standing when it came. Malcolm called at 6:03 in the morning. Imani was already awake since 5, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee she'd made too strong and the photograph still face down where she'd left it, watching the Seattle sky do its slow, reluctant brightening through the window. She picked up before the second ring. "I've been through all 63 documents," Malcolm said. His voice had the particular quality of a man who hadn't slept. Not frayed, Malcolm didn't fray but compressed, like something under sustained pressure. Hayrin wasn't exaggerating. These are extraordinarily detailed. Dates, amounts, routing descriptions, transaction codes. 2 years of cash movement through those warehouses with enough specificity to reconstruct the entire financial flow. A pause. This is not peripheral evidence. This is the architecture. Imani looked at the photograph on the table. How does it change the mediation? It changes everything about the mediation. Right now, Seong-jae's team believes we're coming in with the legitimate account records and the message history, solid documentation, but containable. They've been preparing to contest the valuation figures and offer a number they calculate is high enough to make you accept, and low enough to protect the organization's liquidity. Malcolm's voice tightened slightly. They have not been preparing for 63 documents that could end Quan Pacific entirely. Do they know about the transfer? Hayrin sent it at midnight. If anyone is monitoring her communications, they know by now. If not, he paused. We have a window. Possibly. Imani turned her coffee cup in her hands. How do we use it? We go in with the full package. Everything, the legitimate records, the message history, the expense documentation, and the 63 files from Hayrin. We lay it on the table before Seong-jae's team has had time to regroup. We don't threaten. We don't wave it around. We simply present the complete picture and let them understand without ambiguity what we're holding. He paused again. The question is whether you want to use it as leverage for a better settlement or whether you want to submit it to the federal inquiry. Imani thought about this. She thought about Misuk in the restaurant, her steady hands on the teapot, her voice saying, "Be careful how far you push it, and be certain you understand what you're pushing toward." She thought about Hayrin in the bare feet and the sweatshirt, sitting in the half-unpacked apartment with her arms around her knees, saying, "I know," in the quietest possible voice. She thought about Seong-jae in the back of the car, looking at her through the open window, not threatening, just present the specific exhausted presence of a man who had run out of angles and was trying, imperfectly and too late, to find a way to be honest. "Leverage," she said. "I want my settlement. I want it clean, I want it fair, and I want it done. What happens to the organization after that is between Seong-jae and the federal office and whatever he built and whatever he's willing to answer for." She paused. "But I am not going to be the one who submits those documents." That's not my war. Malcolm was quiet for a moment. Understood. And Malcolm. She made her voice very deliberate. Nothing moves today without my explicit direction. Not a phone call, not an email, not a document sent or received. You run every step by me first. Understood, he said again, and this time it carried the specific weight of a man who had made one unilateral decision and understood precisely what it had cost. She went to shower. She dressed carefully, not the charcoal blazer from the failed first mediation attempt, but a deep navy suit she'd bought 2 years ago for a keynote presentation and had never quite found another occasion for. It fit well. It was authoritative without performing authority. She wore small gold earrings that had belonged to her grandmother and no other jewelry. She looked at herself in the mirror for a moment, not for reassurance, just to confirm that the person going into that room looked like someone who had already decided how this would end. She looked like that person. She drank the rest of the too-strong coffee and left. The mediation office was on the 12th floor of a building on 4th Avenue, a different location from the first attempt neutral ground, negotiated by both legal teams, chosen for its privacy and the specific anonymity of its conference rooms, which had clearly been designed to make every conflict feel like every other conflict. Pale carpet, tasteful art, a long table with water glasses arranged at precise intervals and a mediator's placard at the head. Imani arrived 8 minutes early. Malcolm was already there, standing near the window with his phone in his hand, and he turned when she walked in with an expression that was professional and cautious, and, underneath both, genuinely sorry in a way she had decided to accept and move past simultaneously. She sat down. She put her bag beside her chair. She placed her hands flat on the table, the way she always did when she needed to feel the surface of a situation, literally, physically grounded, connected to something solid. The documentation package was in a folder in front of Malcolm. 63 files plus everything else, organized chronologically, indexed. She had reviewed the index at 5:30 while the coffee was brewing. She knew exactly what was in it and exactly where every piece was and exactly what each piece proved, and she was not going to let this room surprise her. Seong-jae's team arrived at 9:02, 3 attorneys. No Dae-sung, Seong-jae himself in a dark suit and no tie, looking like a man who had also been awake since before dawn and had made peace with what that meant. He came in and looked at Imani immediately, directly, the way he always looked at her without deflection, without the performance of casualness. She returned the look with the same steadiness. His lead attorney, a tall Korean-American man named Sung, whose reputation Malcolm had briefed her on, looked at the folder in front of Malcolm and then looked at his own materials, and something shifted in his posture. A fraction, barely visible. The particular micro-adjustment of a man who has just noticed that the room contained something he didn't plan for. The mediator, a different one, from the attempt that never completed. A woman in her 50s named Patricia Hale, who had the specific competent calm of someone who had seen every version of this, opened the session by stating the terms of the proceeding and confirming. Both parties had agreed to good faith participation. Then she asked if either party wished to present preliminary materials before the discussion of settlement terms. Malcolm said yes. He opened the folder. He did not make a speech. He did not position it or frame it or editorialize. He simply began distributing documents, the legitimate financial records first, then the message history, then the expense documentation, and then, one by one, the first 12 of Hayrin's warehouse files, organized by date, laid on the table with the quiet precision of someone who understands that the weight of a thing does not require ceremony to be felt. Sung stopped him after the 4th warehouse document. "I'd like to request a recess," he said. Patricia Hale looked at both parties. "We've been in session for 6 minutes. I understand that." Sung's voice was controlled. "I'd like 10 minutes with my client." Imani looked at Seong-jae. Seong-jae was looking at the documents. He had picked up the 3rd warehouse file and was reading it with the expression of a man confirming a thing he already knew, not shocked, but absorbing the specific reality of seeing the thing outside the context in which he'd always managed it. His jaw was tight. His hands on the paper were completely still. He set the document down. He looked at Imani. She held his gaze and let him look. No recess, he said to Seong. His voice was quiet and flat. Keep going. Seong turned to him. Something passed between them in Korean, low and rapid. Seong-jae said 2 words. Seong sat back. Malcolm continued distributing. By the time the full package was on the table, the room had the particular charged quality of a space in which something irreversible has just occurred, and everyone present knows it, but no one has yet said so. Seong was very still. His 2 associates were making notes with the rapid mechanical focus of people managing anxiety through motion. Patricia Hale's expression had not changed, but her attention had sharpened into something more concentrated. Seong-jae had not looked away from the pile of documents since the warehouse files began. Ms. Caldwell, Patricia Hale said, do you wish to speak to the documentation? Imani looked at the documents. Then she looked at Seong-jae. No, she said. I think the documentation speaks for itself. She paused. I'd like to talk about the settlement terms. Seong started to speak. Seong-jae held up one hand, the same gesture she'd seen before, the slight raise that stopped the attorney mid-breath. What do you want? Seong-jae said, directly to her across the table, as if the mediator and the attorneys and the carefully arranged water glasses didn't exist. What I've always wanted, she said, my premarital assets protected. My business account separated cleanly. Reimbursement for the documented marital expenses used to fund a separate relationship. And a settlement structured so that I have no ongoing financial entanglement with Quan Pacific or any entity associated with it. He absorbed this. His breathing was controlled, and the documents. What about them? What do you intend to do with them? She held his gaze. That depends on whether we finish this today. The room was very quiet. Seong leaned forward. Caldwell, I want to be clear that any representation that those documents would be. I'm not making a representation, Imani said evenly. I'm telling your client what I want and how I intend to proceed if I get it. She looked at Seong-jae, not Seong. I didn't come in here with those files to destroy you. I came in with them because last night someone put a photograph in my mailbox to remind me that I'm visible and manageable, and that the organization can reach me whenever it wants. She kept her voice level. I came in with them to make it clear that I'm not manageable. That's all. Something moved across Seong-jae's face, something complicated and layered, the expression of a man processing multiple things at once. The photograph, which he apparently hadn't known about, and the meaning of not having known, and what that said about Dae-sung, and what it said about his own position within his own organization, and underneath all of that, something else, something that looked almost like recognition, like seeing a person clearly for the first time in a long time. Who sent the photograph? He said. It wasn't quite a question. I think you know. His jaw tightened. When last night, after I met with your mother. He closed his eyes. Just briefly. When he opened them, the complicated expression had resolved into something singular and cold and entirely directed inward, the look of a man who has just confirmed a betrayal by someone he trusted with the organization for 11 years. Seong, he said quietly. Yes. Give me the settlement figures she's proposing. All of them. Exactly as her attorney has them. Seong hesitated. Seong-jae, I think we should give me the figures. Seong passed a document across. Seong-jae read it. He read it the way he read contracts fast, completely, with the attention of someone who had been reading high-stakes documents for 20 years and knew where the weight was. He set it down. He looked at Patricia Hale. These terms are acceptable, he said. The room went so quiet that Imani could hear the ventilation system. Seong turned to him. Seong, they're acceptable. His voice had the finality of something that has passed through deliberation and come out the other side. All of them. The asset separation, the reimbursement, the business account structure. All of it, he looked at Imani. I want one addition. What addition, she said. A clause confirming that Miss Caldwell has no knowledge of and takes no responsibility for any aspects of Quan Pacific's operations, past, present, or future. A formal documented confirmation of her separation from any organizational liability. He held her gaze. I want her clean, legally and entirely. Whatever happens to the organization, it doesn't touch her. Imani looked at him. The ventilation hummed. Outside, Seattle continued being Seattle. Entirely unaware of the 12-floor room in which a marriage and an empire and 2 years of complicated truth were being concluded in plain language across a table with water glasses, spaced at precise intervals. "That addition is acceptable," she said. Patricia Hale said, "Let's get this drafted." It took 4 hours. 4 hours of careful, meticulous legal language. Malcolm and Sung and Patricia Patsfa working through every clause, while Imani sat at her end of the table and Seong-jae sat at his, and they occasionally looked at each other across the distance and said nothing, because everything that needed to be said was being said in the documents, which was where it had always belonged. There was one moment, halfway through, when one of Sung's associates raised a question about the valuation of a shared travel account, a minor point, financially almost negligible, and Seong-jae said, without looking up from the page he was reading, "Give her what she's asking for." Sung started to calculate the differential. "I don't need the calculation," Seong-jae said. "Give her what she's asking for." Imani looked at the table. At 3:47 in the afternoon, the settlement agreement was complete. Patricia Hale read the final document aloud, the full text, every clause, in the measured cadence of someone for whom this was professional routine, and who understood that the people in the room needed to hear it spoken as much as they needed to see it signed. Imani listened with her hands in her lap. She caught every word. She found nothing she hadn't agreed to. When Patricia finished, she placed the document in front of Imani. Imani picked up the pen. She felt the weight of it, just a pen, an ordinary pen, but carrying the specific gravity of something that finalizes. She signed her name in full, the way she signed everything, clear, unhurried, legible. Imani Caldwell. Both pages, all required lines. She set the pen down and slid the document across the table. Seong-jae picked up the pen. He held it for a moment, without moving, not hesitating, not reconsidering, just present with it, the way you are present with the last moment before a thing becomes permanent. Then he signed, the same steadiness. His full name in that compressed, careful script she had spent 2 years learning to read. He set the pen down. Patricia Hale collected the documents. She said something appropriate about the process, and the timeline for finalization, and the procedural steps that would follow. The attorneys began gathering their materials. One of Sung's associates made a phone call in a low voice near the window. Imani put her pen back in her bag. She stood. She picked up her bag. She looked at Malcolm, who gave her a small, precise nod, not celebratory, just confirmatory. Done. She turned toward the door. Imani, Seong-jae's voice. She stopped. She turned. He was standing at his end of the table, suit jacket still buttoned, both hands at his sides. The attorneys had created a bubble of professional distance around both of them without meaning to. The way people do when they understand a moment is private. He looked at her across the length of the table. Dae-sung will be removed from the organization by end of week, he said quietly. I want you to know that. She looked at him. Is that for me or for yourself? He considered it both. A pause. Mostly myself. I should have seen it years ago. What he was doing. How he was managing things without telling me. I told myself it was efficiency. It was loyalty to the organization at the expense of everything else. His jaw moved slightly. I understand that pattern better than I did 6 months ago. She held his gaze. Are you in therapy? He blinked. It was the last thing he'd expected her to ask. I start next week. The corner of his mouth moved. My mother insisted. Good, Imani said. That's good. She meant it. He looked at her for another moment. The room was emptying around them, attorneys moving toward the exit. Patricia, gathering her materials, the careful apparatus of a concluded, proceeding dismantling itself with quiet efficiency. I'm going to tell you something, he said, and I need you to know it's not a negotiation. It's not an attempt at anything. It's just the truth. She waited. The day I canceled your ticket, he said. I knew it was wrong. Not after. Not when you confronted me. I knew it the moment I did it. I sat at the computer, and I changed the name on that booking, and I knew exactly what I was doing, and what it meant and what it said about where you actually were in my life. He paused. And I did it anyway. Because Havren was threatening, and the organization was complicated, and you were Imani. You were strong, you were fine. You would understand, or you would be angry, and then you would understand. And either way, you would still be there, because you were my wife now, and why would you leave? He exhaled slowly. I mistook your strength for permission. That is the most honest thing I can say about 2 years. The room was nearly empty now, just the two of them, and the table, and the pale carpet, and the cities outside the windows going about its Thursday. I know, she said. It came out quieter than she intended. Not soft, just true. She had known this for months. Had known it in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, with the documents spread on the table. Had known it in the car with him outside her condo. Had known it in the mediation room and in Malcolm's office, and in the half-awake hours of every night, since the airline notification had frozen her mid-motion in a bedroom that was never quite hers. She had known the shape of his mistake, and she had still had to leave. Because knowing the shape of something and being able to survive living inside it are different operations entirely. Take care of yourself, she said. He nodded once. The same small, precise movement she'd seen from Misuk in the restaurant, the gesture of a family that communicated in economies. She walked to the door. She went through it. She didn't look back, not because she was afraid of what she'd feel if she did, but because there was nothing left in that direction that belonged to her next step, and her next step was what mattered now. The elevator doors opened. She got in. She pressed the lobby button and stood with her bag on her shoulder, and her hands at her sides as the doors closed, and the car began to descend, and she felt the settlement like a physical thing, settling into her body, not triumphant, not relieved, not anything as simple as those words. More like the particular sensation of a weight you've been carrying, so long you stopped registering it as separate from yourself, suddenly, finally, set down. The absence of it almost vertiginous. The awareness of how heavy it had been arriving only once it was gone. The lobby arrived. She walked out into the cold Seattle afternoon. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed. Then she started walking. The weeks that followed moved differently from the weeks before, less charged, less tactical, but not easier in any way that felt like ease yet. The settlement's finalization required additional paperwork, additional signatures, the administrative machinery of legal conclusions grinding through its necessary sequence. She worked with Malcolm's office through it with the same efficient attention she'd always given difficult processes, and by the end of the 3rd week, she had begun to stop tracking the steps as a countdown and simply do them as they arrived. She worked. She worked the way she'd always worked, specifically, carefully, with the full attention that had built her consultancy from nothing into something with a waiting list and a reputation, and clients who trusted her with their most expensive dreams. 2 new referrals arrived in the first week after the mediation. She took both. She worked through the evenings when the quiet of the condo became the kind of quiet that required filling, and she turned in proposals that were better than anything she'd produced in 6 months, which told her something about where her mind had been and where it was now. She heard nothing from Seong-jae for 11 days. On the 12th day, a text arrived, "Dae-sung is gone. I thought you should know." No preamble, no follow-up. Just that, she read it twice. Then she replied with a single word, "Okay," and set the phone down and went back to the proposal she was drafting for a couple who wanted to celebrate their 40th anniversary in Patagonia, which required a specific kind of logistical attention that she found, in this particular season of her life, genuinely soothing. The divorce became final on a Tuesday in late November, 7 weeks after the mediation. Paperwork arrived by email, scanned, signed by the court, time-stamped at 11:42 in the morning. Imani was on the phone with a resort contact in the Maldives when the notification came through. She saw it in her peripheral vision, noted it, finished the call with full professional attention, and then sat in her office for 4 minutes doing nothing. 4 minutes. Then she opened the email and read the document from top to bottom, the way she read everything that mattered completely, attending to every word. She found nothing she hadn't expected. Every term of the settlement was reflected accurately. Every protection she'd negotiated was in place. Her name appeared 47 times in the document, always alone, never hyphenated with his, and by the 40th time it felt less like notation and more like restoration. She forwarded the document to Malcolm with a brief thank you. She called her assistant and told her she was taking the rest of the day off. Then she put on her coat, not the red one, that was still in her closet, waiting for Iceland, and she walked to the coffee shop, 4 blocks from her condo, and bought herself a cup. And she sat by the window and watched the rain come in off the sound, and she let herself feel the full, complicated, expensive weight of being done. Cried a little. Not dramatically, nothing performed, nobody watching. Just the specific quiet kind that happens when the adrenaline of a long fight finally. And what's left is the actual thing underneath, grief, real grief, for the tender parts of something that had been genuine before it became something else. She grieved the rainy nights outside her office. She grieved the proposals that had made her cry because they were so private. She grieved the version of Seong-jae that had existed in certain rooms, the version that remembered things, and waited and showed up in ways that cost him nothing but attention, which was its own form of love, even when everything else around it was broken. She sat with all of it until the coffee was gone, and the rain was heavier, and the window was fogged with the warmth of the shop. And then she paid, and she left, and she walked home in the rain without calling a car, because she had always hated calling car services, and there was no longer anyone she needed to explain that to. She booked Iceland that evening. She had been holding the idea of it for months, not as a plan, exactly, more as a direction. Something she kept oriented toward when the immediate terrain was impassable. Northern coast in winter. The particular quality of light in a place that barely commits to daylight. The specific silence of a landscape that had no interest in making anyone comfortable. She had pushed it back twice in 2 years for reasons that felt reasonable at the time and felt, now, like accommodations she should not have made. She booked direct. She booked a small guest house near the northern coast that her own professional research had turned up months ago, run by a woman who, according to 3 separate traveler accounts, asked no personal questions and made extraordinary bread. She booked it for 10 nights, because 10 nights was enough to actually arrive somewhere rather than just visit it. She bought the coat 3 days before her flight. She found it not in the window where she'd first seen it, but in a shop near Pike Place, hanging on a rack near the back with no particular ceremony, deeply, unambiguously read in the way of something that knew what it was and required no argument to justify it. She tried it on. The fit was right. The color in the shop light was exactly what she remembered from the first window a year ago, before Seong-jae had told her it was too much. She bought it without hesitating. She wore it on the plane. She wore it through the Reykjavik layover and on the small regional flight north. And when she stepped off the plane into a cold so immediate and unapologetic, it functioned almost as a greeting. The guest was 40 minutes from the airfield, along a road that ran beside dark water and rock formations that looked like they'd arrived from somewhere fundamentally older than human memory. The innkeeper, a woman in her 60s named Sigrid, compact and direct, with the particular warmth of someone who did not confuse warmth with sentiment, showed her to a room with a low ceiling and a window that looked north, and said dinner was at 7 and left, without asking a single question about why Imani was traveling alone in February. Imani unpacked carefully. She hung the red coat on the hook by the door where she could see it. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window at the gray water and the gray sky and felt, for the first time in she couldn't count how many months, genuinely still. Not resolved, not healed, whatever healing was supposed to mean at the end of something like this. Just still. The particular stillness of a person who has finally stopped moving fast enough to outrun the thing they're carrying and is now willing, or at least ready, to put it down and look at it. She looked at it for a long time. She looked at all of it, the airline notification, the kitchen, the dining room table at 2 in the morning, the lobby with the divorce papers and Seong-jae's stunned face, the spreadsheets, the messages, the red heart that had cracked the whole structure open. The rehearsal dinner dress, the reception courtyard, The elevator at the mediation and the drive back to Bora Bora, and the photograph in her mailbox, and Hayrin's bare feet, and the 63 documents spread on a conference table. She looked at Seong-jae in the back of the black car, asking her to get in. The mediation table, saying, give her what she's asking for. At the last moment in the conference room, telling her he'd mistaken her strength for permission. She looked at all of it, until she could see the whole shape of it, not the way you look at a wound, not with horror or self-pity, but the way you look at a complicated piece of work you did, under difficult conditions. Acknowledging both what went wrong and what you managed to salvage. Understanding that the two things coexist without canceling each other out. She had loved him. That was true. He had failed her. That was also true. She had stayed longer than she should have. That was true too, and she owned it, not the failure of it, because she was past assigning herself failure. For the act of having loved someone imperfectly and hopefully, but the fact of it, the plain, honest fact that she had seen some things clearly from the beginning and had chosen to believe that clarity wasn't required to stay. And she had left. When she finally understood the full picture, she had left not in anger, not in performance, not in the dramatic shape that stories about women leaving powerful men tend to take. She had left with a folder and a phone call, and 47 minutes of cancellation calls, and the specific quiet efficiency of someone who had always known how to dismantle a thing cleanly when the time came. She had left, and she had fought, and she had been frightened, and she had been strategic, and she had been, in the end, herself. Entirely, uncompromisingly herself. That was what she kept coming back to, sitting on the edge of a bed in a low-ceilinged room in Iceland with the gray water outside and the red coat on the hook. She had been herself through all of it. She had not become smaller. She had not bent to accommodate a shape that wasn't hers. She had paid a cost, a real one, expensive and ongoing, and she had paid it as herself, and that mattered to her in a way she didn't need to explain to anyone. She went downstairs for dinner. The bread was, as advertised, extraordinary. The first 4 days were for walking. She walked during the brief windows of gray daylight, along the coast, across volcanic rock fields, through landscapes that made no concession to the human requirement for beauty, and were consequently more beautiful than anything that had tried. She walked until her legs were tired, and her lungs knew the cold, and her body had been reminded that it was a body, and not just a vehicle for the sustained operation of a crisis. She processed client emails in the evenings. She spoke to her assistant twice. She made no phone calls that weren't necessary. On the 5th day, a letter arrived. Sigrid brought it to her at breakfast with the same pragmatic directness she applied to everything else. Comment net, no curiosity. Just the envelope placed beside the breadbasket. Imani looked at the handwriting. She knew it immediately. Seong-jae's compressed, careful script. She did not open it immediately. She finished breakfast. She thanked Sigrid for the bread, which she did every morning, because the bread genuinely warranted it. She put on the red coat and went outside and walked to the rocky place above the waterline where she'd been going in the mornings, to stand with the wind and think or not think as required. She stood there for a while with the envelope in her hand and the wind coming off the water and the sky doing its slow performance of almost light above the horizon. Then she opened it. He had written 4 pages. She read them slowly, standing on the rock above the water, the wind moving around the envelope. The first page was about Dae-sung. Not as justification or explanation of what Dae-sung had done, he did not attempt to manage it that way. He wrote about what it had meant to discover that the man he'd trusted to run the organization's operations had been acting unilaterally. Surveilling people Seong-jae had told him to leave alone, sending photographs to a woman who had never done anything to the organization except marry its leader. He wrote about sitting in his office the morning after the mediation, after Imani had told him about the photograph, and calling Dae-sung in. He wrote about the conversation short, in Korean, final, and about what it cost to remove someone who had been part of his life for 11 years and what it revealed about the ways the organization had been running without his full knowledge. He wrote that this was the thing Imani had tried to show him about his own household and his own life. For 2 years, the ways things happen in the spaces you're not watching, the cost of trusting structures over individuals, The particular blindness of a powerful man who believes his authority is coextensive with his awareness. The second page was about Hayrin. He had not contacted her since Imani left the apartment on the day she moved out. He did not know where she was. He had written to tell Imani this, not to demonstrate restraint, but to confirm what Imani had said in Hayrin's apartment, that the bond between them had been a structure, not a relationship, and that structures collapse when the conditions that required them change. He wrote that he thought Hayrin was probably better without him, which was the kind of honest assessment he was not sure he could have made 6 months ago. He wrote that he thought the same thing was true of Imani, and that thinking it hurt in a way that was different from the ways he was used to being hurt less like damage and more like clarity. The third page was about therapy. He had started 2 weeks ago. His therapist was a Korean-American woman in her 40s who had, in their first session, asked him to describe the last time he had done something for someone without calculating the return, and he had not been able to answer quickly, which had surprised him, and then had not surprised him at all. He wrote about this because he thought Imani deserved to know that the thing she'd named the management of people, the confusion of protection with control, was a thing he was finally examining in a room where someone was helping him take it apart correctly. He wrote that he was not telling her this to be forgiven. He was telling her because she had been the first person to name it plainly, and she deserved to know that the naming had landed. The fourth page was the shortest, 3 paragraphs. He wrote that he had sent flowers after she moved out, and she had given them away, which he'd learned from the building concierge, and that when he heard this, he had felt, for the first time, the full weight of what he'd done, not the incident, but the pattern, the long erosion of the things she had offered him. He wrote that he had purchased 2 tickets to Bora Bora, and she had refused them, and that standing in the elevator bank, watching the doors close on her, had been the moment he'd understood that there were things his money and his organization and his considerable capacity for getting what he wanted could not retrieve. He wrote, "You told me I could have stayed that morning. I have thought about nothing else for 4 months. Not the honeymoon, not the money, not the legal proceedings. Just that morning, the kitchen, the way you held the phone, the fact that you gave me every opportunity to make a different choice, and I made the same one I always made, which was the one that protected the structure instead of the person inside it. I am sorry. Not the way people say sorry when they want something. The way people say sorry when they finally understand exactly what they did." He wrote the coat. I don't know why I said it, but I meant it. "Buy the coat," he wrote. "Take care of yourself, Imani. I hope Iceland is everything you needed it to be." He had not signed it with his name. At the bottom of the last page, he had drawn a small, clean line, just a line, horizontal, final. The way you mark the end of something that is done. Imani stood on the rock above the water and read the last page 3 times. She felt the letter completely. She did not manage it or process it from a distance, or hold it at the clinical remove she'd been using for months to keep herself functional. She felt it the way you feel things when you're standing on a rock in Iceland with wind coming off Arctic water, and there is nowhere to put it except inside yourself, the grief and the recognition and the complicated, unresolvable truth of a man who had understood something too late and was honest enough to say so. A sound like green wood splitting, and the equal truth of a woman who had loved him and left him and was standing in a red coat on the other side of the world, holding the letter that closed the last open question. She stood there for a long time. Then she folded the letter along its original creases, slid it back into the envelope, and held it. She thought about keeping it. She thought about the desk drawer in her condo, the appropriate middle distance of things that are true and finished, not discarded, not displayed. She thought about what it would mean to carry it home, to put it somewhere and know it was there. She thought about what it would mean to put it down here, in this place she had come to because she needed somewhere that had nothing to do with any of it, and leave it. She stood on the rock for another minute. Then she put the envelope in her coat pocket, the red coat, warm against the cold, and walked back toward the guest house, because she hadn't decided yet, and she didn't need to decide today. And not deciding today was itself a form of the freedom she had come here to locate. The aurora appeared on the 8th night. She had stopped checking the forecast after the 3rd day, the way she'd stopped checking a lot of things that she used to monitor for control, and now understood were better met when they arrived. She was outside simply because she couldn't sleep standing in the packed snow yard behind the guest house in the red coat, with her hands in her pockets, looking up at a sky that had no business being that full of stars. Started as a shimmer. Green at the edges of things, the kind you could mistake for something atmospheric or optical until it moved, and then you understood it was neither of those things. It moved like something alive, something deliberate. It unfolded across the black and long, slow ribbons that widened as she watched, until the whole northern dome of the sky was shifting in colors that had no adequate names, green shading toward white at the center, violet at the periphery. An occasional gold that appeared and disappeared like something the sky was testing. She stood in the snow for a long time. She did not take a photograph. She had brought her camera, and she did not use it. Some things are not for documentation. Some things exist entirely in the having of them, in the specific, unrepeatable fact of being present for something that is larger and older, and more indifferent than anything you have ever done or will do, and the act of documenting them converts them from experience into evidence, and she had enough evidence. She had built her entire last 6 months on evidence. She did not need one more piece. She just watched. She watched until her feet went numb and the ribbons began to fade, pulling back toward the horizon with the same slow deliberateness with which they'd arrived, unhurried, unaware of her watching, doing exactly what they always did, regardless of who was there to see it. When it was over, she stood in the dark yard for another few minutes, letting her eyes readjust to the ordinary dark. She reached into her coat pocket. The envelope was there. She held it without taking it out, felt its specific weight, its edges, the slight texture of Seong-jae's careful script on the outside. She thought about keeping it. She thought about the drawer, the middle distance, the acknowledgement without the weight. She thought about what Mi-suk had said in the restaurant. You were good for him, in the ways that mattered, and what she herself had said in return. I know. I was also not the right person to finish the job. She thought about standing in the elevator at Malcolm's firm, feeling the letter between her fingers in the dark of her bag, understanding that it was a line she was being asked to recognize. She had recognized every line. She had recognized them clearly, and she had crossed them, and what she knew, and what she needed, and what she was willing to pay for. That was the story in the end. Not the honeymoon. Not the canceled ticket. Not even the red heart, or the warehouse records, or the photograph in the mailbox. The story was a woman who saw things clearly, and made her own decisions about what to do with what she saw, and who paid the cost of those decisions without outsourcing it to anyone else. She took the envelope out of her pocket. She held it for a moment in the cold. She could see well enough by starlight to look at her own name in his handwriting one more time. She did. She looked at it for a long moment, the compressed, careful letters, the particular architecture of a man who had taught himself to write in another language and had never lost the deliberateness of it. Then she folded the envelope once along its width, not to destroy it, just to make it smaller, and she put it back in her pocket. She went inside. She sat at the small desk in her room and opened her laptop and started drafting an email to a new client, a woman celebrating a significant birthday who wanted 3 weeks in Japan, unhurried, with access to places that didn't require reservations, but happened to be exactly right. Imani knew 3 such places in Kyoto, and 2 in the countryside near Kanazawa, and 1 in Tokyo that she'd been saving for exactly this kind of client. She drafted the email carefully, with full attention, with the specific professional pleasure of someone who is good at her work and knows it. She finished the draft at midnight. She saved it to send in the morning. She went to the window. The sky was dark now, the aurora completely gone, the stars doing their ordinary winter work, with no announcement. The water below the ridge was black and distant, and the cold outside the glass was absolute. She looked at it for a while. She thought, Iceland is everything I needed it to be. She thought, tomorrow I will walk again, and eat Sigrid's bread, and work, and sleep. And the day after that, I will do the same. And at the end of the 10 days, I will go home to the condo and the table and the window and the business I built, isn't it? And I will keep building it. And the life on the other side of what just happened will be mine, in the way things are yours when you've paid for them fully and chosen them without apology. She thought, I'm going to be all right, not the performed kind. Not the kind you say to reassure people who are worried about you. The actual kind, slow arriving and unglamorous and real. She went to bed. She lay in the dark with the letter in her coat pocket, hanging on the hook by the door, and the stars doing their work outside, and the cold pressing against the glass, with the indifferent persistence of a world that did not require her recovery to proceed, and would proceed regardless. She breathed in. She breathed out. She closed her eyes. And somewhere above the clouds, the aurora was still moving patient and enormous, running its ancient colors across the sky, for no one in particular, and everyone who happened to look up, doing exactly what it always did, asking nothing, offering everything perfectly and completely itself.